Rear Window is a 1954 American mystery thriller film that was directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Released by Paramount Pictures, the movie stars James Stewart, Grace Kelly, Wendell Corey, Thelma Ritter, and Raymond Burr, and it was first screened at the 1954 Venice Film Festival. This movie is considered by many filmgoers, critics, and scholars to be one of Hitchcock's best, and to actually be one of the greatest films of all time. I'm one of these people that believes this. This movie is definitely in my top 10 of all time. And if you've never seen it, do yourself a favor and watch it. It'll suck you in. Its voyeuristic plot is all Hitchcock. And for all of this to be done on one soundstage and one setup is just amazing. Hitchcock teaches us the dangers of spying on your neighbors. The film concerns L.B. Jeff Jeffries, a photojournalist who's stuck in his apartment thanks to a broken leg. He accidentally witnesses what he thinks is a murder, but he must prove this to the police, his nurse Stella, and his girlfriend Lisa, that he's just not imagining this in his mind. The movie's original story doesn't include Lisa or Stella. It was based on Cornell Woolrich's short story, It Had to Be a Murder. In that version, the voyeuristic protagonist doesn't have a girlfriend or a nurse, although he does have a day houseman named Sam who checks in on him. And that leg injury that's so prominent in the film isn't explicitly mentioned until the very last line. The director ends up using actual murder cases to inspire his film. John Michael Hayes wrote the screenplay for the movie, but Hitchcock helped it out by using actual crimes at the center of the story, one being the 1910 case of Dr. Hawley Crippen, and also the 1924 case of Patrick Mohan. Cripper killed his wife, told his friends that she went to America, and then he aroused suspicion by flaunting his secretary around town. Police later found body parts in Cripper's home and arrested the doctor for murder, although some people claim nowadays that Cripper was actually innocent. Mohan also dismembered his pregnant girlfriend, throwing pieces of her body out a train window, but he couldn't figure out what to do with her head. And this was a gruesome detail that inspired Hitchcock to include a plot thread about digging up the neighbor's flower bed for evidence. This film could have looked a little bit different without Grace Kelly, and that could have easily happened. In the fall of 1953, Grace Kelly was offered the female lead in 2 films, one of them being this film, and the other being Elia Kazan's On the Waterfront. Although she was dying to work with Hitchcock again, On the Waterfront would have allowed Kelly to stay in New York, which is what she preferred over Los Angeles. Still, she ultimately chose to play socialite Lisa Fremont over the blue-collar Edie Doyle. Instead, that part went to Eva Marie Saint, who would later on become a Hitchcock blonde herself with the movie North by Northwest. Now, Hitchcock had a way at getting back at people that he didn't like, and he usually did it through his films. He modeled Rear Window's villain on a producer that he hated. He had a long-standing grudge with his former producer, David O. Selznick. Hitchcock believed that he had meddled too much in his movies, so much so, Hitchcock disowned his first film with that producer. That film was Rebecca. His ties to Selznick ended in 1947, but Hitch doesn't easily forget, and he decided to enact a sly bit of revenge on screen. It involved Raymond Burr, the actor that played Rear Window's villain, Lars Thorwald. Hitchcock gave Burr glasses, just like Selznick's, and curly gray hair to match him as well. He also instructed Burr to adopt many of the producer's mannerisms, such as the way he cradled the phone on his neck. When everything was said and done, Burr's murderer's character looked a lot like Selznick, and this was no doubt a real irritant to the famed producer. Jimmy Stewart's wife really didn't want him to make this movie, and the primary reason being the beautiful Grace Kelly. Before she was Princess Grace of Monaco, Grace Kelly had a reputation, whether it was true or not, for having affairs with her male co-stars, even the married ones. One of these men was Ray Milland, whose spurned wife just happened to be good friends with Jimmy Stewart's wife, Gloria. Gloria was not very thrilled at the prospect of her husband working with Kelly, and she developed quite a bit of paranoia to go along with it. It's said that she was constantly on the set, watching for signs of some kind of an affair. Nothing ever materialized, but some of the rest of the cast said that Kelly was a huge flirt, and that they thought that Jimmy Stewart slid back to his fancy-free, footloose bachelor days and enjoyed it. It's not said that he flirted back with her, but he seemed to not mind the attention he got from her. Georgine Darcy was 17 years old when she was cast as Miss Torso, who was Jeff's dancing neighbor. Hitchcock picked her out of a pile of publicity photos. Hers apparently caught his eye because she had paid extra for color prints of her shots. Darcy was fairly new in town, having left her home in Brooklyn just the year before to pursue ballet in California. Ross Bagdasarian played the pianist neighbor who is frequently seen composing new pieces. The credits bill him as the songwriter, which is pretty appropriate considering what he did when he wasn't acting. He was really a pianist and a composer himself, and he made a name for himself by creating Alvin and the Chipmunks. But before he recorded that Chipmunk song in 1958, he helped Hitchcock with his Rear Window cameo. If you're a Hitchcock fan, you know you always see the famed director in at least one shot in his movies. In this movie, watch the songwriter's apartment, and you'll see a portly fellow winding his clock. That's Hitchcock himself. Now, by most accounts, everybody was completely crazy about Grace Kelly, and who can argue that point? She was absolutely gorgeous. It's said that everybody just sat around and waited for her to come in each morning. People would just gawk at her. She was so beautiful. She was unbelievably kind to everyone, so considerate, just a great, beautiful soul. Jimmy Stewart really praised her instinctive acting ability. She had a complete understanding of the way motion picture acting was carried out. And that's obvious in the scenes in this film. She has a great presence in this picture. Now, Alfred Hitchcock spent a great deal of time with the costume designer Edith Head on Grace Kelly's look for the film. This was not something that was unusual for Hitchcock, as he often obsessed over his relationship with his leading ladies. One costume that he fretted over quite a bit was the negligee that Lisa wore when she spends the night at Jeff's. Hitchcock ended up pulling Head aside and talking to her about maybe putting falsies in this costume to give Grace Kelly a bustier look. She didn't have much upstairs. The costume designer talked to Kelly about it, and she didn't like that idea. Instead, they made a few changes to the costume and the construction of it, and her posture while shooting those scenes, in order to fool the audience so that the rather flat-chested Kelly looked more robust than she really was. Take a look at this tense and exciting movie. It's typical Hitchcock, who has a maximum build-up to a punch and fills you with deception and incidents to divert and amuse you as an audience member. This is definitely one of my favorite watches of all time. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.